So the time has come, the Warhammer 40k Balanced Data Slate has arrived, and in this video, myself and Michael are going to be taking a look at the most impactful changes that have occurred throughout not only the points changes, but any changes in the actual rules of the game as well. Michael, the Balanced Data Slate, what is it, and what is the point of it?
Well, Stephen, the Balanced Data Slate is Games Workshop's way of balancing the game between all the different factions that we might play on the competitive scene or at home with our friends. It makes sure that each faction in the game fits into a sort of 45 to 55% win rate so that nobody leaves home not willing to play 40k because their army is terrible.
Yeah, and also those armies that are doing super good, just a way for them to curb their performance slightly, to bring them down, and those factions that are typically struggling, a bit of a boost and a bit of elevation. So we're going to be covering exactly that. We're going to be covering the sweeping changes, okay, that we've recognized as players that are going to tournaments and understand what the overall meta, which is basically what is the most competitive options available at the game, and how they might be changing throughout this entire process as well. So what you can do at home is taking a look at the points changes. We'll link to all the documents that you're going to need. We're not going to go through what unit's gone up or down. We're just going to be covering what we feel like is the most impactful changes. So Michael, where should we start?
Well, first of all, we need to start with some of those overarching changes. Now, across the board, indirect weapons have seen a rise in points.
Yeah, so your indirect fire is any of those weapons that do not need line of sight, and these have typically been plaguing 10th edition and probably all the editions before as well. They've always been a huge issue in the game because terrain is a massive, impactful, I suppose, element, and when that's not required or even needed, because you've got indirect fire, then it can all of a sudden create a bit of a curve on how strong some of these units are. So we've seen some increases, haven't we?
We have. Night Spinners have gone up 30 points. That's probably the biggest increase. We've seen Manticores go up as well for Astra Militarum and, of course, Space Marine Whirlwinds.
Yeah.
So that trifecta of the most competitive indirect fire weapons, they have gone up considerably.
Yeah, and one of the issues with indirect is that it can often lead to a very kind of uninteractive game. Your opponent can sit there, shoot you, and you'll be removing models without them even be able to see you. So it's really nice to see that change.
Right, so another sweeping change, Eldari, one of those powerful armies in the game, been very successful, very oppressive in fact. They've had yet another amount of nerfs across the board. In a previous Balanced Data Slate, they did get hit. Now they've been hit harder.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've had changes to their army rule, less fate dice, they've had points increases as mentioned, the Night Spinners rules actually changed, we'll go more into depth a bit later. We've also seen Chaos Space Marines take some hits, rules interactions have changed, and of course points on those most commonly taken and spammed units have gone up.
Yeah, and when we refer to something as being nerfed, what we mean is we've had their power removed in some way, shape or form, whether it's by making things more expensive so that they're less efficient, or by simply making their rules change so it's just less effective as well.
Absolutely. Some armies have not been affected, which may surprise you when we get onto them, and other armies have, of course, been boosted. In fact, one of the armies, the Drukhari, have had a whole new detachment thrown in for them, which we're not going to cover in this video. We'll cover it in a different one because that will take too much time, but very exciting stuff for Drukhari. So I think overall, Games Workshop committing to the balance here by throwing a new detachment in and all of these sweeping changes is very, very inspiring for the future.
So Michael, what is the first faction we're going to be taking a look at?
So Adeptus Sororitas. The Sisters of Battle, we've had a few points decreases. The most significant things here is that Val's gone up, but all Paragon Warsuits have gone down 30 points.
Okay.
So you can take more Paragon Warsuits in your army. One balance change was that the Triumph's ability to let you use unlimited Acts of Faith is now just 2 per phase for that unit.
Yeah, this was the interaction, I think, for this army that was really a gimmick, where players were constantly being able to add fate dice in to an unlimited amount to either be horrific at something like Overwatch or just become absolutely unkillable. So again, having a cap on here is going to really make sure that players are using their Miracle Dice in the right place at the right time and really bring a little bit more skill to the game, which I think is going to be fantastic for the overall balance of this faction. So rather than a faction being held up by one mechanic, we actually want the faction to be held up by a really diverse set of units and fantastic overall rules. So I think that's a great change for the game. Also, we've seen some of their key units which were being, effectively spammed. And what we mean by the spam is when somebody takes the maximum possible. Okay, things like the Arcoflagellants, they're up.
They are up, and this is an internal balance thing, isn't it, Stephen? So internal balance is where we want all of the units in the codex to be a choice.
Yeah.
We want there to be a choice. And Arcoflagellants, there wasn't really a choice.
You took them.
You took them. They're so strong. Feel no pain 4+.
Yeah.
2 wounds each, kicking out 60-something attacks with sustained. So they have obviously gone up. We mentioned Indirect's gone up. The Exorcist has gone up. Not unexpected. However, to improve that internal balance, we've decreased Retributors, Zephyrim, Repentia.
Yeah.
So now there's more options for you. And that's exactly what Games Workshop want.
Yeah, I actually think this is going to put Sisters in a really interesting position. The gimmick is now gone. The Indirect has been hit pretty hard. And the one key combat unit is gone up significantly. So I actually think the top tournament list, I've played against it at Leicester. It was very, very strong, quite oppressive and very powerful. That's going to have some significant changes, probably by nearly 200 points. So I think that list is going to really have to change. But with the options now of some of those other units become a lot more cheaper, hopefully we're going to start to see some diverse lists, and it's going to be interesting to see what the Sisters community really does with it. Okay, Michael, up next, Adeptus Custodes.
So this is a faction that many people were hoping for some big changes in this data slate. The previous one hammered them with some unit composition changes and some points increases.
And also the way stratagems worked.
And the way that the stratagems worked. They lost battle tactics, so they weren't able to do things like fight first in multiple places on the board.
Yeah.
Now, there hasn't been a huge amount of changes here. The most important one is that their Feel No Pain from their detachment rule, Feel No Pain 4+ against mortal wounds, now applies to devastating wounds as well.
So I think this is a great change. I think with the previous balanced data slate, changing devastating wounds to no longer count as mortals meant that the Custodi army rule became kind of lackluster. Sure, it might affect you against the grenade stratagem, maybe against the tank shock, but that was about it. So really now having this rule come back in to be effective against devastating wounds and mortals means that just that extra little bit of resilience is going to start to come back in for what can be often a very fragile army against, an army that has lots of devastating wounds. So it's going to give that little bit survivability back to the faction that needed it.
Yeah, this one's very, very interesting because the dynamic exists there between what was a top army, we'll get to see, so the Eldar, with a huge amount of devastating wounds, and Custodes, which used to be at the top of the game playing against each other.
Yeah.
So this was essentially a double nerf from the last data slate. However, we've got some points decreases as well now to tie this in, and it's about 5 points per model on pretty much all of the Custodes units. The Bike Captain's gone down 40. So we'd probably expect to get maybe 1 to 2 more actual Custodian models in a standard list.
Yep.
Or a unit of Sisters that might go and hold an objective or stand on your backfield. So not a huge amount of change, but you will get a few more models for your army, and they'll survive a bit longer against dev wounds.
Yeah, and it might be one of those things that it might not be enough. Maybe the stratagems that were infected before were really the thing that was holding the faction up. But this is probably Games Workshop's way of just trying to find a happy kind of medium. Otherwise, this faction's win rate has the potential to shoot straight back up. So I think this is a tentative step. More could have been done potentially, but it's going to be quite interesting to see how this shakes out. But with the amount of Indirect out of the game, and also then meaning that this faction can really utilize terrain a lot more and be in a foot, basically, infantry army, also might actually prop up its win rate a little bit more with Indirect coming down so much.
Yeah, I agree completely. There's also a sort of hidden buff, actually, with this army, and that is Trajan Valoris. So he has the ability to give his unit the ignoring modifiers to characteristics, which has changed per the rules commentary to affect all of their weapons. So you can't change this unit's damage or AP. So now I expect to see Trajan to come back into competitive lists to face things like Satan and avatars, which are essentially unchanged for Eldar.
Or even Space Marines of Armor Contempt.
Yeah.
Because when you're only AP1, AP2, as soon as you face against Armor Contempt, it doesn't really do much, and your Custodes don't really feel like they should. They're not really hitting that impactfully, but now with this rules commentary change, this is going to be making sure that those Custodes actually feel and fight like they should. So I think, yeah, some subtle little changes, and we should start to see this faction win percentage go up by maybe 3 to 5%. But before we continue, I'd like to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, The Outpost. If you're looking for great deals on your miniatures, paints, and gaming supplies, we've got you covered. Their wide variety of exceptional service makes them the go-to destination for all hobby needs. So don't wait, check out The Outpost today. Link in the description below. Okay, next up, Michael, is AdMech. Now, AdMech's codex has been released quite recently. And they haven't had any changes, not on points or rules. What's your impressions on that?
So I think this was expected because it's been so recent for their codex release.
Yeah.
There's not enough data for Games Workshop to pull from to make decisions about changing rules or changing points. Now, AdMech is one of those armies that's very difficult to collect, actually, as a player, because they're quite expensive for the amount of points each model costs.
Yeah.
And that's why there's not a huge amount of players for it. So if you are an AdMech player, you need to start going out there, playing your games at tournaments with whatever rules you've got. Give Games Workshop a reason to make changes for the AdMech. I feel like AdMech at the moment do struggle a little. There are some very strong armies out there. I think in particular Space Marines Vanguard with the -1 to hit, because AdMech have that all-encompassing 4+ ballistic skill, they do struggle to get any range damage in. And so I think we do kind of see some more board control, lots of mass units. You're forced to play that way with AdMech.
Yeah, it's not really utilising the ranged units that they have access to. Also things like Chaos Space Marines, where they've got stratagems which allows them to be untargetable. Again, not very interactive. Eldar, which can shoot you without them getting shot back. Again, all that indirect change. So I think on the plus side, because there isn't any decreases to this faction, I would expect this faction's win rate only to go up because some of its alpha predators are going to come down in performance and also popularity. There does tend to be a kind of community mindset shift. When a faction has been nerfed, people do drop from it and they do start to take up other factions as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one pays out. But yeah, like we said, more data is required to really help this faction and where it's needed. Right, Michael, the Eldari. Let's start with the balanced data slate changes. They've kept the changes from the previous balanced data slate, and obviously even changes to things like how Overwatch work and the Wraith Knight. That's all remained the same. What other changes have we seen from the balanced data slate?
Right, so the first one is their army rule. Fate dice. You now only get 6 d6 at the start of the game.
From 12.
From 12. It's literally halved.
Yeah.
What this means is that your likelihood of rolling the dice results that you want, 6s, is considerably reduced.
It's 1 in 6 now.
It's 1 in 6 now. And I would say a 5 and a 6 are the perfect ones to have available to you in any given moment.
Yeah.
You're only going to have 2 for the game.
And this is going to be massive because this is going to stop things like Fugan just overwatching you every single time you move because they've always got a guaranteed 6. This is going to massively impact the game. It's also going to hugely impact list composition because people are now going to actually start to take things like Eldrad that gives you more fate dice, or even some of the Guardian units which allow you to generate more fate dice as well. Now, with all that being said, these are actually like a tax then for the army, because if they want these extra fate dice to run the army how they used to, they're not going to have the damage output because things like Eldrad and Guardians don't bring in damage. What they actually bring in is things like board control, objectives secured, and those elements. So we're going to see the lethality of the actual faction come down if they want that same amount of fate dice.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what we find with a lot of these competitive lists that put out a huge amount of damage is when points do go up on them, and points have gone up, they tend to lose assets that can score tactical points for them.
Yeah.
So if you want to keep up that damage, you have to lose somewhere else in your game. Further changes, the enhancement Fate's Messenger now only affects the bearer.
Not the unit.
Not the unit. So this used to let you change a dice roll for a hit roll, wound roll, or save into a 6, which could keep your Wraith Guard alive, it could trigger devastating wounds. That is now no longer in play, and I would argue you probably won't see the enhancement at all at this rate. Phantasm.
Yes, this is a massive one because Phantasm was probably, in my opinion, the strongest stratagem in the game. Being able just to move a unit anywhere you want, a fixed distance, was insane without any form of trigger. This was kind of impossible to really play around. It was super hard to charge a unit that had Phantasm. It was super easy to move out the way from a unit that's got a short-ranged gun, try to deep strike in. That was so difficult to play around. So what is the change to Phantasm?
Okay, so it's still infantry only. However, the move is now at D6. So gone are the days of like a lone operative or Tart Wayleaper being able to move 7 inches and now be untargetable. Gone are the days of your Wraithguard brick being behind a wall and just moving 7 inches forward towards the enemy, ready for your next turn. D6, it's not reliable. You're still spending that 1 CP for an unknown result in the game.
And I think that's the thing. Before, that Wraithguard unit could be sat just outside of a ruin, you know, shoot, do what you want to, and all of a sudden you've moved back behind the ruin, you now can't be shot. Or whatever that might be with whatever unit you've chosen. This is going to be a massive change because in your mind, you're going to know, well, if I roll a 1 or a 2, I literally will not be able to clear the wall distance because of the base size that I'm currently on. And that all of a sudden becomes a huge decision for the Eldar player, whether they use that or not. It's sure it might be used on things like Fugan, who might be on one side of a wall, because even with a roll of a 1, his base will still fit on the other side of the wall. That's about as much as you're going to really guarantee from it. So huge change, much for the better now, and it's going to become a decision for the Eldar player rather than I'm going to spend 1 CP in Phantasm.
Absolutely. So speaking of other impactful changes, the Night Spinner, in addition to its points increase, its ability has changed. It's now in line with other units that do something similar. You hit that enemy unit and you apply a -2 to its move, advance, and charge rolls.
Yep.
Now this used to stop your opponent from advancing at all.
Yep.
-2 to all of those rolls is a total of -6 to their movement. So depending on what they roll, that's still going to cause a lot of headaches.
Yeah, this is a very strong rule generally. I know things like the Basilisks have this for Guard. The change here probably still is as impactful against an army that was combat orientated that could advance in charge, because now you're going to lose 4 inches off your result, which is kind of the same as not being able to advance if you took the average roll of being a 4. So it hasn't really changed the impact there. What it has impacted is things like the Crisis Suit, the units that just want to be able to move and advance and shoot. So that unit's going to be less effective or affected rather than, you know, a unit that could advance and charge.
Yeah, absolutely. And important to note here now that if you do have an ability to automatically advance 6 inches without rolling a dice, you're not affected by the -2.
Yeah.
So if you are one of those armies like World Eaters, for example, with Apoplectic Frenzy, you can go that full 6 and now charge.
Because it's not a dice roll.
Yeah, you don't need to try and hide your Exalted 8-pound in your Rhinos anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of other changes. The Incarn. This is huge.
Yes, you can only now pop up when a unit dies in your turn. You can't, you know, for example, accidentally your opponent shoots a unit and you dart out the way like people were doing. It's only once as well, so you can't keep changing where you're popping up. You really need to decide when you're going to pop up and replace a, you know, destroy unit's position. And it's going to be very difficult now for an Eldar player to get their Incarn out of danger. They're going to have to really think ahead. They're going to have to use their Incarn in a way, move it, charge it, kill something, have another charge lined up, kill a unit, and then bring it over to safety. So it's actually going to go back to a place where it was a little bit more interactive than the place that it's been in for, you know, the whole of 10th edition, which was completely impossible to get hold of.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Again, really great change.
Yeah, teleports once, only in your turn. Be careful, because once you committed him, they are committed and they're in danger.
The Wraithguard. They had an ability before. They could, when shot, shoot anywhere they wanted, at anything, and it was absolutely horrific. So what is the change now, Michael?
Now these have to shoot back at the unit that attacked them.
Right, now this comes in line with every other rule that is similar. So anytime you've got a shoot back rule, this follows that same suit and same kind of line of thought, which is great. This means now you can stay outside its range, you can hit it with as much guns as you possibly can, whittle down some of those numbers, and if you did want to shoot it up close where it could shoot you back, then hopefully you do enough damage, whereas if they do shoot back, you're only going to lose a couple models, rather than just having, you know, a unit that was about to do like a little action for you or something, scan an objective, and now it's been nuked off the table, or maybe had a charge teed up somewhere else, and all of a sudden that one's gone. this is much, much better.
Much, much better. And it's tied in with a 20 points increase on Wraithguard per 5 models.
Okay, it's pretty significant.
So yeah, hefty, hefty.
So overall, Eldar players, you're now going to face a huge challenge as to your unit choices. I was really personally disappointed not to see any decreases on some of those units that I felt really needed it, such as your Howling Banshees, your Striking Scorpions, your Shining Spears, even Wind Riders, units that aren't really being taken that often. We're probably still not going to see those because viably they're just not as competitive as some of the units that we've already mentioned. Are we just going to see Eldar armies that are the same list but less of it? Is the list going to now just be 2 Night Spinners and an Incarn in Wraithguard instead of 3? You know, there will be some adjustment period for Eldar player. I just don't hope they, you know, completely fall off the bridge. And if they do, then hopefully it'll bring in some data to hopefully see some points decreases on those other units. Now the rules feel a little bit fairer because the gimmicks are gone.
Yeah, I completely agree. My real hope here is that if Eldar do drop below that 45% win rate, which I don't think is that likely anyway, then Games Workshop, instead of just reversing balanced data slate rules, they actually do those points drops on those units to try and boost the faction in a different way.
For more internal balance. I think that's what it's lacking, is internal balance.
I agree.
Okay, Michael, up next is the Astra Militarum, or the Imperial Guard as they're known as. Is there any significant changes for the balanced data slate?
There are huge changes, actually.
Okay.
So the main change here is that an officer can issue an order when it disembarks from a transport or is set up on the battlefield.
Right, so I'm assuming previously this was a command phase ability, and obviously if you're in a transport or if you're not on the table, you can't use it. This is actually a huge change then.
Yes, absolutely. The main thing that this does for the faction is it creates a huge amount of variety in lists now. You can start to see a mechanized build with transports. You can see the Scion builds come back where they deep strike and they issue orders, and we can start to step away from the car park of indirect tanks and the gun line.
Brilliant.
And that's what we want for Guard because we're tired of that. And so is Games Workshop because the Manticore's gone up 30 points.
Well, also, so with your opponents, I can take that straight.
Another thing that's come in from the rules commentary is that a unit that's been destroyed whilst battle shocked is still considered battle shocked for the purposes of any stratagems that might affect them.
Right, okay.
I don't think this was in doubt, but clearly some people did. So you can't use reinforcements on a destroyed battle shocked unit.
Right, okay, cool.
To bring the unit back on. I think that's about it. So maybe a few list build changes, maybe less Manticores, but the competitive build with Bulgrin and Rogel Dawn's kind of unaffected.
Okay.
So we'll see where they go for the next data slate.
So really then what we're probably going to see is a few more of those mission playing pieces come back in, and it might even improve its scoring potential, but the overall lethality of just mass indirect come down.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think that's going to be hopefully healthier for the game, but not really affect the win rate too much of Astra Militarum.
No, and to be fair, you could just drop a unit or two and you get your Manticores back in.
Okay, Michael, up next, we're going to take a look at Chaos Demons. Any significant changes from the balanced data slate?
Yes, Demonic Pact. So the way that you take allies for demons has changed.
Okay.
What this means is when you're taking your allies, and in 2,000 points this would be about 500 points, you can't include more non-battle line specific God-aligned units than the battle line version of them. So you can't, for example, take more Bloodthirsters, Blood Crushers, Blood Masters than you have Blood Letters in your allied detachment.
Okay, so if I was, let's say, a World Eaters player, then I now need to take some Bloodletters to match the points that I want to take of those Bloodthirsters, basically the non-battle line units.
Yeah, and it's done by number of units rather than points.
Okay, cool.
And so this is an interesting change. Doesn't affect really the Nurglings going into armies because they are battle line.
Okay.
But what it does mean is that with the, huge amount of points decreases here, it does mean that the internal balance of Chaos Demons can be improved, but the external balance of including them in different armies is unaffected.
Yeah, because I think that was where we are mostly seeing a lot of demon units, was a sprinkling here of like a Changeling or Flamers. So to actually now need to bring in some of these other battle line units is kind of a tax for that. But yeah, without kind of skewing the faction where demons become unplayable. So I think these are great changes, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think, if you do want to, there's so many factions out there that want to take these lone opted characters, Changeling, Blue Scribes, now have to take a battle line unit.
Yeah.
You now can't ally in Shalaxi because they're 450 points.
Right.
So you can't include a battle line in addition.
Okay.
So it's not legal to take. So it does now balance demons a bit more internally.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen like 5 points decrease across all the little characters, 10 points across a lot of the other units, and some sweeping changes on the big guys as well, like 40 points down on Scarbrand and the Great Unclean One. Even Kairos has gone down. But your main, most commonly taken, Shalaxi, Be'lakor, Lord of Change, Bloodthirster, they haven't changed.
The overall impact on this is that demon players now, you're going to have a few more tools at your disposal, and you're not going to feel like things like the Chaos Space Marines and the World Eaters and all the other factions were sort of bringing you down, because the fact that they were taking a lot of demon units to supplement their army, to give their armies more tools in the toolbox when they've got their own codex to do that. And also, this is another then hit for Chaos Space Marines, because I know Chaos Space Marines were certainly allying in some of these units to get cheap lone operative characters for mission scoring. So overall, I think this is not only an impactful change for Chaos Demons, but also a better way of bringing down Chaos Space Marines as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. In terms of win rate, I would expect the Demons' win rate to go up.
Yeah.
Because there are huge points here. You can get 1 to 2 extra units across an entire army. All of the other factions in the game that were really their competitors have been nerfed.
Yeah.
In essence, there are some rules commentary changes as well. So there's one where your deep strikes doesn't count as a normal move for reactive moves. So now your opponents can't do like a reactive move to get away from your Shadow of Chaos 6-inch deep strike. So they can't like stop you from charging.
That's good.
So there's some nice little changes in there, and definitely check that out just in case it affects your build.
Okay, Michael, Chaos Knights. Any rules changes?
No rules changes at all.
Okay.
Big points changes.
Right. How big are we thinking?
So quite big. So 25 to 55 on the big knights.
Yeah.
The Brigand, the most popular war dog with the Melter and the Gatling gun, that's gone up 10.
Okay, yeah.
It was the best one, so that's understandable. The Execution with the 2 autocannons is down 10.
It's actually nice to see a good bit of internal balance changes here. The units that are taken less, giving them a little bit of help, and the units that are being taken all the time. And again, this probably brings it back to some of those Chaos factions that were allying in the Brigand as well. By making that a little bit more expensive, makes it look a little bit less appealing, but also then doesn't impact the Chaos Knights itself as a faction.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It makes it more appetizing to take some of those big knights.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that we will see big knights even with these changes.
Okay.
Because they're difficult to play, especially in the UK TC terrain set. You might see them over in other countries and on different terrain sets.
Well, certainly with player place terrain, it's a lot easier because you can space out your terrain as you like to a lot more greater degree. But I would say that by playing on the Games Workshop standard layouts, they can be quite restrictive. Just not necessarily on what you can move over, but it's actually where you can have to end your base.
Yeah.
You can't end your base on one of those small little pieces of terrain, even though you can move over it freely. It's very easy to get move blocked and in a position where you just, although you should be able to stand there, you just can't. So I think, yeah, you're right. Those big knights are probably going to suffer a little bit more from the terrain, more so than their actual damage output or points.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I wouldn't expect any change in their win rate from this.
Right, Michael, next up, one of the biggest, baddest, and probably best factions of the game at the moment. They've won multiple tournaments. They've got some horrific lists out there. There's different build options for this faction. The Chaos Space Marines, what's changed?
So we've had 3 major changes in the balanced data slate. The first one of these is that now to embark on a transport, you have to have the same Chaos mark as the transport.
Perfect.
This is huge, and it makes a huge amount of sense as well. So a Nurgle Rhino, which is one of the most common situations we'd see this in, would spend a command point, not be targetable over 12 inches away, and then some, undivided chosen would jump out and reroll their hits and wounds, and it would be crazy.
Yeah.
Now they'd need to be Nurgle as well in that transport.
Yeah, because there were certain certain unit types that are most optimal for either being Slaanesh for advance in charge or Undivided for the stratagem for rerolls. So again, forcing you now to go, do I want the efficient transport and the less efficient unit choice? Or do I go for the less efficient transport choice, but more efficient unit choice, there's actually some decisions here. You can't just have the best of the best.
Yep. And those decisions got harder, Stephen, because the Nurgle stratagem now is an 18-inch you can't shoot me rather than a 12-inch you can't shoot me. So even if you did have that Rhino, what that means is that you can engage with these targets at a safer distance without the same threat of counter charges in following turns. Overall, with the Nurgle strat, it still doesn't impact those gunline units that were at the back of the map, like the Forge Fiend, which you'd always take as Nurgle. The Nurgle strat at 18 inches is still going to protect that unit.
Yeah.
So it's not changed a huge amount there.
But we have seen the Forge Fiend go up in points to make it slightly less palatable, but there's another change as well.
Yes, and this one's more than people might initially read it as. So Profane Zeal, the strategem's been reworked.
Okay.
So the target of this is only Chaos Undivided now. Previously, it could be used on any Chaos unit.
Okay.
And it gave you reroll ones to hit and wound. Now it's Chaos Undivided only, and you get rerolls to wound only.
Not any hits.
Not any hits.
And you've got to think about this as well, because a lot of those different factions were proccing sustained or lethal with this stratagem, and having extra reroll hits is a fantastic way of getting more sustained or lethal on 5s, for example, in combat. That's not going to be the case now.
No.
It's still going to help you with your Devastating Wound Chaos Lord, but you now can't be in the targetable Rhino. So there's, like we said, better decisions here. I think we're still going to see those efficient units, the Undivided, making the use of this with the Chaos Lord, who's also gone up in points as well, to get as many Devastating Wounds out as possible for quite a cheap little package. But in a Rhino now, that can be shot dead and the unit can be dealt with a little bit easier. So I think this is definitely going to lead to a much more interactive play experience for people that are playing against Chaos Space Marines. Any other points changes that are going to be significant for the top meta build?
Yeah, so on the Chosen note, they've gone up 20 points for 5. So that means 10 is plus 40 points across the army.
Significant.
If you've got 20 across the army in 5s or 10s, that's a huge 80-point increase.
Yeah.
Chuck your 3 Chaos Lords in there, that's plus 60 across the Chaos Lords, because they're up 20 each as well. That's significant. If it weren't just that, Accursed Cultists have had changes. They're OC1 now, so they're not as good as holding objectives.
Okay, yeah.
They also only regenerate in your command phase.
Okay.
So not the opponent's one as well. And both Accursed and the Dark Commune have gone up 10 points each. That's a lot of points increases.
Yeah.
And I think the competitive builds out there are pushing 200 plus points now in debt, so to speak.
It's going to be interesting to see what those Chaos players start to do, but still a strong faction. Their rules mechanics with the Dark Pacts are still very, very strong. And hopefully we'll start to see some other units become to be a little bit more popular to maybe kind of mitigate some of these points adjustments. So
let's take a moment to appreciate Colourforge, our fantastic sponsor. Their range of spray paints has become our go-to for making our miniatures come to life quickly and efficiently. The quality and variety of colours they offer are truly unmatched, providing a smooth application for stunning effects every time. Check out Colourforge for your next hobby project.
So Michael, next up is Death Guard.
Okay, it's best you don't say anything here, Stephen.
Probably
because you're not the most popular amongst the Death Guard fans. There has been a balance status late change.
What is it?
The Biologist Putrefier, the guy with the grenades,
yeah.
He used to be able to throw a grenade with the stratagem in addition to someone else doing it.
Right.
And you could do it with all 3 if you took 3.
Sounds good to me.
So that was 4 grenades going off in one turn.
Yep.
Games Workshop clearly not happy with that. You can only use that ability once across the army per turn.
Ridiculous.
Death Shroud have gone down.
Okay.
5 points for 3, so 10 for your 6.
Yep.
And you're pretty much taking Death Shroud in every list.
Yeah.
So that's a great little change, especially if you had those builds with lots of them in it.
And the Lord of Virulence, who gives you the reroll wounds, am I right?
So what he does is the reroll wounds, and you get the +1 to hit with the indirect and ignores cover, I believe.
Very good. He's down.
He's down 20. Typhus is down 20.
Yeah.
I can't justify that for the life of me, but he is down 20. Then you got the Bloat Jones down. The Plague Marines and Plague Burst did go up. Plague Burst indirect, so it follows the rest of the points changes. They're up 15 each.
But they had previously came down in the last balanced data slate, which I was shocked by, because I felt like at the time the indirect was pretty good as it was, especially when you start to combine it with the Lord of Virulence anyway. But having him come down, is even if you're 1 for 1, you probably haven't really lost a huge amount.
No. So overall, Death Guard, you're probably at net 0 points gained or lost. The biggest, I think, impact here is actually Mortarion's ability to ignore modifiers
Yes.
in an aura. We've talked already about Trajan allowing you to ignore damage modifiers and AP modifiers. Now, Mortarion has that aura. He can apply it to all of your Death Guard. You can ignore damage. You can ignore Armor of Contempt, strength modifiers, all of that goodness.
-1s to hit.
-1s to hit. Brutal. Yeah. And I think we're going to see Mortarion creep back into lists a bit more. I think he was dying off towards the end of the last few events.
Well, I think he died off because of the Warhammer Worlds FAQ, which basically said that modifiers didn't work that way. And now, obviously, they've come out and said, no, it was intended for them to work that way. So I think that change in itself now is going to be massive for this faction. We are going to see 3 play bursts again with Mortarion. It's going to be a very, very efficient kind of gun line. And then obviously you can sprinkle in some little combat units or some board control. I think overall it's going to be pretty terrifying to play against.
Yeah, I mean, Death Guard are doing all right. Yeah. They really are doing all right. And honestly, good to see a Primarch on the field.
Yeah, and we're seeing more and more of those top players pick up the faction, get excited about playing it as well. So I'm sure their win rates will continue to slowly improve. So
yeah, agreed.
Death Guard, you've done all right. Right, Michael, time for Drukhari. Now, I can't even believe I'm actually saying this after going through 9th edition, where they had nerf upon nerf upon nerf, where this was one of the strongest factions in the game. In 10th edition, they've been quite lackluster. They're probably paying for the 9th edition sins, but they've seen a lot of love. They've got a new detachment, which we're not going to cover. We're going to do a separate video on that detachment as well to really make sure that we're giving that the right coverage we want. But they've also got some other army rule changes. What are they in the balanced data slate?
Okay, so empowered, where we could spend pain tokens to give ourselves reroll hits.
Yeah.
In melee now, you're going to get an extra AP on an empowered unit.
Right, okay.
That's very impactful, because I know a lot of Drukhari players wanted an extra AP. They felt that was what they were missing.
Yeah.
Games Workshop have listened. You've got an AP now in melee on all those empowered units. We do also have points decreases across the army. Incubi, down 5 per 5. We're going to see a lot of those, I think.
Yeah.
And we've got down 15 for a lot of these, down 10. Raiders down 10. So these transports, Venoms are down 10. We're going to see a lot of transports, a lot of little characters. Drukhari looking good.
Yeah, if you're a Drukhari player, though, you might have to buy some more models because there are some significant points decreases. So this is going to be very, very interesting, and probably the faction I'm actually most excited about playing post-balanced data slate.
Yeah, I'm interested to see it on the table across from me. You know, I can't say I missed 9th edition Dark Eldar, but 10th edition I've definitely missed the presence. We're
going to wait, though, to give you our verdict on Drukhari. We might be excited about it, but are they actually going to be any good? We're going to wait until we've taken a look at that new detachment and also how everything shapes together with the points and also that AP change. So that's going to be coming up in another video, and make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications so you see that video as soon as it drops. Next up, Michael, is going to be Genestealer Cult.
No changes, Steve, in the balanced data slate. They've still, of course, got everything that affected them last time. You're coming back on a 5+. You get +1 if you're battle line. You get +1 if it's the first or second battle round.
Yeah.
Couple of changes. Pure Strains have gone down 10 points. The Nexus has been clarified so he doesn't move your opponent's Genestealer Cult tokens.
Oh, in the mirror match.
In the mirror match.
Yeah.
Which, if you did that, you're a G. However, some indirect nerfs to things like the Reductor Saboteur, because deep striking and getting out of a transport that's moved doesn't count as a normal move.
Yeah.
For reactive purposes, she's not going to be as safe as she once was.
Right.
And she can't do those bombing moves.
Yeah.
The reverse, though, is that when you deep strike to do 3 inches away with your bomb satchel packs, your opponent can't reactive move away from you.
Yes. Yeah. Unless they got Phantasm.
Unless they got Phantasm, which unfortunately trumps every other reactive move in the game. No real changes for Genestealer Cult. I would not expect any change in win rate.
Interesting, isn't it? Because you think indirect is one way of actually really smashing this faction.
True.
We might see things like the bikes come back into play a little bit more, because as soon as you're looking against playing against 3 Exorcists or 3 Night Spinners, any of those like Atalan Jackal bikes just get picked up too easily, because the stratagem that you've got so that a unit can't be targeted is only on infantry, not on the bikes. I don't know. I think Genestealer Cult might come out a little bit better just because Eldar's been hit so hard. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm excited to see what they can do.
Okay.
I'm not saying massive amounts, but I think they'll do a little bit better than they currently are.
So a change actually in the rules commentary allows you to redeploy Infiltrators units into No Man's Land. And I think this is the first faction we've talked about where it actually comes in a bit more, because we've got that Aberrant Brick and we've got Pure Strains now down 10 points. Do you think that's going to help their win rate?
I think it's going to give a little bit more utility back to the faction. I think it's a slightly more get out of jail free card if you did want to use those Aberrants and realise you've maybe positioned them incorrectly. I think if that redeploy went back to being able to do it after you've seen who's going first, it would have been a lot more impactful. But typically what you could do is bait one side, let your opponent set up in a particular way, then switch it to another side potentially. That might have some use, and if you do go first, then you could really capitalise on that.
Yeah, nice. Well, I'm convinced maybe an increase in their win rate, slight increase.
Yeah. So, Michael, up next is Grey Knights. Do we have any balanced data slate changes? Because this is a faction that, on paper, look good. But in reality, they weren't doing as well as maybe they should have been. So, the army rule's good. Any changes, though?
Yeah, so change to Dread Knights, essentially.
Okay.
And what this does is they've got +1 AP and ignores cover now on their heavy side cannons.
So that's kind of an AP change by 2.
Yes.
Which is massive.
It's huge because they are your only real answer to armour or tanks in the game with Grey Knights. So having that now, it makes you a lot more reliable at taking those vehicles out.
There is an issue though, Michael.
Yeah.
It's only strength 10.
It is only strength 10, so you're not taking out Land Raiders.
You're not.
But you can take out battle tanks, not Leman Russes, but Predators. You can take out transports.
Yeah.
And I feel Grey Knights really struggled with like the Rhino, like literally just the Rhino. But now we can actually kill Rhinos.
Yeah.
They also get an improvement on their weapon skill on their close combat weapons.
Yeah.
They hit on 2s, which is a bit of a joke really before that they didn't.
Yeah.
And it does affect both forms of the Dread Knight, the Grandmaster as well. I think we missed a trick here, not improving the AP and giving ignores cover to all side cannons.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure why we've not done that, because I think they needed that across their infantry as well.
I'd agree, yeah.
So they could kill Rhinos with the infantry too.
Well, like their, is it the Purgigators, that are the kind of Devastator equivalent unit, certainly need some help, because otherwise what's their real role? To have a side cannon, because it's not that impactful, especially even trying to dig out units that are in terrain. That would have been really, really nice to just help them against elite infantry as well, because a lot of their close combat is only damage 2. So giving them ability to deliver some ranged damage would have also been pretty helpful.
Yeah, but maybe we'll see more Dread Knights come in to add a bit more firepower. I'll tell you what, we won't see more coming in. Brotherhood Librarians.
They're up in points.
They're up 10 points.
Yeah, but they're such a staple of the list. I think we'll still find the wiggle room for them anyway.
Yeah. I think that's an internal balance thing.
Yeah.
A clarification as well on Drago, his +3 on his charge doesn't work from a transport.
Okay.
Because it's set up on the battlefield is the wording. It only works for his deep strike and teleport.
All right, nice. So Grey Knights, I don't know if their win rate's going to change a huge amount. I don't know if it's enough. I would have liked it to be, because I love Grey Knights. I think they're a super cool faction.
I don't know if Dread Knights are good enough to start to carry the faction.
Yeah.
So I don't think anything's going to change with them. I suppose they should get better because of the nerfs to generally the other armies that tend to prey on them.
I can really, really see this army struggling, though, into Necrons. I think Necrons outmaneuver them. I think they've got better board presence. I think they probably hit harder. And also with the half damage Catans, your 2 damage melee weapons are going to do absolutely nothing. So I think for me, Necrons, and I think we're going to see a rise of Necrons. I think Necrons are going to do Grey Knights better than Grey Knights are. And I think their damage output is going to be pretty...
Well, we've yet to cover their changes, Steve.
Okay, well, I won't say too much more then. But that being said, let's move on swiftly to Imperial Knights. So, Michael, what are the changes in the balanced data slate for Imperial Knights?
Right, their Oath rule for the re-rolls has changed. It's now re-roll 1 hit roll and 1 wound roll.
Okay.
Each time you shoot or fight with a knight.
So what was it before?
Previously, it was re-roll 1 hit roll of 1.
And there was also an interpretation that you got to re-roll all your ones
Yes.
on either. So they clarified that, and now there's been a re-clarification so that you can re-roll 1 of each.
Yes, and this is a great change.
Okay.
Nice little bit of consistency you can throw in.
Yeah.
It will really help those armature builds with the 12 armatures.
Yeah.
Because each of those Melter Lances and a Chainsword attack, you're now getting a reroll of a hit and a wound. So it is a good change, but it's not the same as the interpretation of reroll your ones.
Is it a 1 or just you can reroll any failed wound roll?
So it's any wound, so you can reroll one of your wound rolls and one of your hit rolls.
Okay.
So it's not just a 1 that you can reroll, so you can pick up a 2, a 3, whatever.
That's very good then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a pretty significant change to the faction. And I'm assuming then the points are going to fall in line with the Chaos Knights as well.
Yeah, exactly the same. Down 25 to 40. The bigger the knight, the more the decrease. Helvin's have gone down 10 as well. So
Rex has come down. He was the one that was able to really mitigate around stratagems. And obviously with Overwatch and things like Tank Shock not being really viable for those bigger knights, seeing those, obviously him come down, it makes him a little bit more viable again.
Yeah, definitely. What we didn't see, though, was a change to the Bondsman. So that got changed in the last Balanced Data Slate to not affect the big knights.
Right.
That gave it out. And I think I was expecting them to bring it back in to affect the big knights. Because they're not seeing play.
No.
Big knights are not seeing play. It's all just armigers. And understandably, we've discussed Chaos Knights struggle to move the big guys around.
Yeah.
The same applies here. I would have loved to see that change come back in. But I suppose we'll have to wait and see whether the points decreases and this new reroll, 1 hit and wound, is enough.
Yeah, so I think maybe a slight increase, but it's all going to depend on how popular the faction is and are more those sort of top-end competitive players looking to actually take on this faction again and give it a play. And that's going to be really telling, I think, because this is the issue with when we look at a faction's win rate is also the popularity of the faction with those players that do consistently, get 55 to 80% wins, no matter what faction they play. Is it going to be popular enough and I suppose viable enough for them to actually play it? So, Michael, next up is Votann.
Oh, God. So, Votann haven't had any Balanced Data Slate changes.
Well, they had it before.
They did. They went up from 1 judged enemy unit to now 4. They're quite good. Votann are pretty good.
They're more than good.
One of the top armies. And I personally was expecting that 4 to get reduced to maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah.
It hasn't. And as soon as they kill, of course, one of those 4, and they'll just pick like a little unit that they can kill early.
Scouts.
They get a bunch of CP.
Yeah.
To help fund their sustained hits 2 and everything else. The nasty combos you were seeing. They have had some points changes.
Yeah, and I think by the time we look at the Sagittars going up the Hearthguard, which were the key units that most people were taking, it all basically shakes out is you take 1 less Sagittar. That's what you've lost, is 1 less Sagittar, or maybe 1 less lone sort of character that could have stand back up if it died, for example.
Yeah.
Just remove that guy and your list is fundamentally the exact same. So I think Votann, for me, are going to only see increases here. Eldar's a tough game forever. Chaos Space Marines were a tough game for Votann because they just struggled to interact to kill the rhinos, and then obviously the multiple units are chosen. 1 unit chosen could kill the Sagittar. The unit that also charged could pile in and kill the unit that just popped out of the Sagittar. I think Votann now are going to be in a massive increase on their win performance.
I agree. I agree completely. And I think one of the things to watch will be how they interact with Necrons, the new overlords. Because Necrons have only recently released. So I'm curious to see how those 2 forces interact, because I think they are going to be 2 that are at the top of the game, fighting against each other.
And also now with the way that modifiers works, I know this army's got a enhancement so a unit can ignore modifiers too. So that makes that enhancement a lot more powerful. So yeah, I think for me, Votann, you go right to the top. You will be top of the meta for the next foreseeable. That's my prediction anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I predict an increase in their win rate, a significant one.
And now for a word from our sponsor, C Studios. They are the experts in providing professional miniature painting services, ensuring your armies always look their best on the battlefield. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, C Studios can help bring your miniatures to life. Don't miss out on their quality craftsmanship.
Michael, Necrons.
Okay.
No changes?
No changes.
Released the same time as Admech?
Yep.
So I understand why. Do I like it? I don't like it.
No, I suspect Necrons players probably don't like it either for internal balance, depending on what their outlook was, I suppose.
Yeah, because let's be honest, the Necron community wasn't that happy with the Codex at the beginning. Now, that was because I think the obvious way to play the game and the way that people had built their factions, and I completely sympathise with this, by the way, is when you've built your army to be a particular standard and model type and unit entry and a mechanic, and you've spent months and months and months with a playstyle and army collection, for that to be dramatically nerfed hits hard. Because you now all of a sudden think I need to buy more things or whatever it might be. But the faction on the whole, if we look from a more greater win percentage, is a strong book. There are some very strong builds in there. We've just seen one of our coaches, Matt Laral, go and win the LVO with his. You might have seen the Deep Strike in Monolith, and Matt is cause of all those memes. But that being said, I think the most obnoxious list to play against from a personal experience is 5 Catans. That gives me nightmares. With all the Wraiths as well, that's a strong build. We've seen the change to Immortals through the FAQ, so they don't kick out as many dev wounds.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually the Catans and the Wraiths that are probably worse to play against. Would you agree?
Yes, totally, totally. I was expecting a Satan increase in points, potentially Wraiths or the Technomancer going up, but none of that has changed.
So, Michael, any thoughts on Necrons?
They're very, very strong, and nothing is going to change that.
Yeah.
All of their competitors have hit the dirt, bar Votann.
Yeah.
So we are going to see our Necron Overlords at the top.
I think so.
I don't think there is anything that can shake a stick at them.
No, I think Necrons, Votann, for me, the biggest winners so far, and I can see them both probably going into that dangerous category of above 55.
Yes, yes. And monoliths are all sold out.
They are. Thank you, Matt. Okay, Michael, up next is the Great War, the Orcs. Any significant balance data slate changes?
No changes in the data slate.
Okay.
No rules changes for any of the units.
Okay.
Just points changes.
Some are up.
Some are up.
Some are down.
A huge amount of units that you don't tend to see. Usually like mechanised ones, Morkanauts, Killer Cans, Kill Rigs, the little buggies, all like down 10 to 25 to 30 even.
Yeah.
But some of those very popular units have gone up.
Like the Knobs and the Trucks. Yeah.
Knobs and the Trucks, up 5, and Squighog Boys.
Okay.
15 they've gone up. So for a full squad of 6, up 30.
That's very significant, actually. And I don't know if that's too much for how effective that unit is. That'll be really interesting to see. Will people just drop them out and just take more Knobs? Because Knobs points increases isn't that much. You probably, the most competitive builds, if you were taking the Knobs and Trucks, you've probably lost a unit of Gretchen on the whole.
Yep.
But I actually think for me, the Killer Cans changes is also significant. They could be on the verge of actually, sprinkling some of them in to try. I think people who experiment with Killer Cans.
Yeah.
The rest I'm not sure on. Like things like the Rucker Truck. I don't know if it's enough to make it really viable in some of those really kind of less taken options.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see a battle wagon creep in there because it's got that 20 capacity and 20 beast snaggers with the beast boss. Actually quite annoying to deal with.
Yeah, it definitely is. I've played against that. So
yeah, I could see that being irritating. So and I think you're right. I think we're going to lose a couple of Gretchen. Well, maybe one Gretchen squad, drop some Squidhogs down, take something else instead.
Yeah.
It's just different builds. Orcs are very good.
They're on the cusp right now of being a very strong faction. And I think with these changes, it's going to be interesting to see with some of those alpha predators like Eldar that were really kind of hampering this faction. I think we're only going to see Orcs win rates go up.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think more and more people, because of the impact to indirect is so big, more people are going to be excited to play Orcs. And therefore, we're going to see their win rate significantly increase because those players are going to be drawn to the faction.
Yeah, absolutely. And Orcs is definitely something that a lot of players have dabbled in as well. So, yes, all good for Orcs.
Right, Michael, next up, Tau. Is there any change to any of the rules in the Battle State slate?
Yes, but actually in the rules commentary.
So not an obvious change then?
Not an obvious change, and this is just how Hazardous works.
Okay.
Now, I go through this in full detail in our rules commentary for some rules that you may have missed. Essentially, to sum it up, if you take mortal wounds on a model, you have to keep taking them on that model. If a character takes a hazardous test and fails, you can actually allocate it to someone that didn't fire a hazardous weapon.
Okay.
But if you have any mortal wounds applied, they spill over, and they can spill over to units to models that don't have hazardous weapons.
Okay.
So it's basically trying to avoid anyone doing any gimmicks with spreading around the wounds or losing less models than they should through Hazardous. So it does massively impact the Crisis brick. So if you do play Tau, definitely read the rules commentary.
Yeah.
Just make sure, and they've got a great little example in there with Crisis Commanders.
Okay, cool.
So go read that.
Right, so any changes on points then?
Yes, we've had a few decreases on the commanders that weren't taken. The Riptide and the Vespids are down. Crisis suits are up 20 points per 3.
Significant.
It's significant. I think you just take one less unit of something else.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's Vespid or a Recruit Hound squad or
But
something.
with the commanders coming down, that slightly offsets that. I know they might not necessarily be the most popular ones, but maybe they become slightly more of an option with the points decrease.
Yeah, potentially.
You know, sometimes when you are looking at okay, well, actually, I might just have to take a slightly cheaper commander, and my army's still functioning the same. Maybe that is the answer. I think the interesting one here is Riptides.
Yeah, they're not bad, and their damage profile, or rather their characteristics, are quite strong for the points that they're sat at now.
I always find them tough to kill for their points.
Yeah.
You have to tend to overcommit to really bring one down, and then all of a sudden your army's quite exposed. They're going to be an interesting one. I think we'll start to see more Riptides on the table, definitely.
And I think Vespids look good too, with the ability to go off the board and come back on. It's
Great
a nice
mission,
little
yeah.
mission play unit to start throwing in.
So win rates, do we see it going up or down?
Probably up due to those big dogs being sort of affected.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I don't think it's anything inherent in their changes that's going to affect their win rate.
Thousand Suns.
Not really affected by anything. There's
Okay.
been no balanced data slate change. There has been a wording change on the Exalted Sorcerer on disc, who used to be able to half moves and things on enemy units. That is now been reworded so it applies a named debuff
Okay.
so that it doesn't stack with itself as per one of the new rules in the rules commentary.
Right. Okay, cool.
That's it.
That is the only change.
That is the only change. So T-Suns aren't bad.
Yeah.
They're not bad. So I would expect a small increase.
Just because the other factions have come down slightly.
Yes, Indirect was a bit of a pain for Thousand Suns. All of their 2-wound rubrics.
Yeah.
Chaos Space Runes were a pain for them as well. So, yeah, they should do better.
Okay, nice. All right. So not really a huge amount to say for T-Suns then with no changes.
Not really.
Okay, cool. Right, Tyranids. Any rules changes on Tyranids?
No,
Okay.
but we do have some points changes.
Some interesting ones.
Some very interesting ones. Some great ones, to be fair. So the very popular units have been hit with points increases.
Okay.
So Death Leap has gone up. Gargoyles have gone up, although I would argue you could put Gargoyles up more
Okay.
because they're immense.
Yeah.
The Pyrovores have gone up a bit, but that's about it. Neuralict has gone up 15, actually, so that's probably the most significant one.
Okay.
But then we've had a lot of decreases.
Yeah, on some of the big guys as well.
Yes, the Screamer Killer, very exciting, down 25 points.
Okay.
And the Tyrannofex down 55.
That's a massive decrease, yeah.
So you might actually consider taking him in a vehicle-heavy meta.
Right, okay. So if the meta does slightly change then to be more vehicle-orientated, you'd be considering potentially bringing this one back in?
Definitely, definitely. And with Ironstorm out there, the Tyrannofex is probably one of your best answers to killing something like a Redemptor.
And why is that?
Because it has a massive 2d6 damage, 2-shot gun.
Okay.
Whereas the rest of the Tyranids Codex is like strength 10 or lower and just doesn't have the answers to deal with some of those 2-up save monsters.
So it is one of the only real ways then to reliably deal with that sort of range damage.
Basically, yeah. G-Sealers are down, which is nice. So this is kind of like targeted balance, internal balance within the Codex. I'm surprised Exocrines didn't go up
Yeah, okay.
because they're very, very popular. And I think that some units like the Swarmlord could have come down a bit.
And actually, when Tyranids were released as a codex, it came out in that perfect kind of sweet spot of where it wants to be for balance. So I think on the whole here, we're not going to see too many changes. It looks like good little internal balance, and I think Tyranids will kind of stay roughly where they're at.
So the final non-Space Marine faction, you'll have noticed we're leaving Space Marines till last. The World Eaters.
Yes.
So what balance data slate changes have we had?
So one of the strongest enhancements in the game that allowed you to basically get a huge amount of extra strength and damage. The Glaive now is only going to give you +1 attack and +1 damage.
So no other bonuses. Okay, why do you think they've done that?
Because this guy is just absolutely immense and has the potential to swing so hard. And that variable is massive when it's 1 to 3. All of a sudden, you can go from flat damage 2 up to flat damage 5 with devastating wounds. And also with the other abilities like sustain hits that you can also apply on the unit, it's too strong with the amount of attacks that you also get on a very, very cheap character. So the efficiency point, everybody took it. It was like an auto-include. It was the one thing you always put in was the glaive on a Master Executioner. So it's been toned down and probably for the better.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. They have affected another enhancement?
Yeah, so the Favour of Khorne, this one was allowing you to re-roll your, and it was basically once per battle round, you could re-roll all of your Blood Tithe dice.
Right, okay.
Now, people were using this to fish for Angron to come back, because you need to roll 3 6s in order for Angron to come back. And then obviously if you've got icons, you can use that re-roll and then use other re-rolls as well. This now is once per game. So it's a lot less impactful. You've basically got probably around 50% chance less of Angron coming back.
Yep.
Which is massive because I normally find Angron is a huge swinger in a game.
Yep.
If he comes back late game, he can often be the pivotal point and the reason why that game was won or lost.
Yeah.
And we don't want it to be in the place where that can happen. We don't want to put a game down to 3 6s being rolled or not.
Absolutely not.
At the right time where you could then rapid ingress him and then in your own turn you can do what you want, scorecards, be where you need to be.
Yeah.
So I think on the whole, we're going to see less of that enhancement being taken at once per game. That might also mean we see less Angron.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so they haven't decreased Angron's points?
No.
Why do you think they haven't maybe decreased his points just to make up for the not being able to bring him back as much?
I think in those games it becomes too swingy. It becomes far too efficient.
Okay.
He's very good. He is a combat monster. He's got pretty much an answer to most things with his strike or sweep.
Yeah.
His overall presence, even he's got good OC, he's very, very fast. He can be where he wants to be with advance in charge and fly, extra 2 move. So I think on the whole, if you'd have brought down his points, you'd have also had to coincide that with not letting him come back at all.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Because he could come back 2 or 3 times. We've seen it happen in games on stream. There is another change as well. The Demon Prince doesn't just give you a flat 4+ invulnerable save.
Okay, right. And why? How does this impact?
Because Jackal spam
Yes.
is a thing. Jackal spam, Jackals are very, very cheap. And when you can just give infantry units within 6 inches of 4+ invulnerable save, it's very, very strong. So it's just been tailored back ever so slightly.
Okay, cool. Any other rules changes?
So another rules change on the World Eaters is that you can no longer put your Exalted 8-bound in your Rhino, which was obviously always intended. And if you were that guy or girl that were doing that, then yeah, shame on you, okay? Shame on you. But anyway, so the next thing as well is that Invocatus can now pick another infantry unit to scout, even if it's been enjoined by a Lord on Juggernaut, because often that was like a blocker. Which meant that your Juggernaut Lord couldn't scout move.
Right.
Although it was joined to a unit that could, it just gives you the option to get around it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, very nice.
And then we've got points changes. Khan's up significantly. The Master Executioner also is up. The Favoured of Khorne slightly down.
Okay.
But that's because obviously it's once per game ability change. But your 8-bound and Exalted 8-bound are up as well. 10 points for 3.
So how many points do you think we'll see dropping from a competitive World Eaters list?
Well, depending on, if you were assuming you were taking around 6 to 12 8-bound, you're probably looking at, what's that, about 30 to 40 point increases on 8-bound.
Okay.
And then if you've got a Master Execution in there, that's another 20, so maybe like 60. Khan the Betrayer up 20. I think that might be a little bit too much for him. I don't know whether people just drop him out.
Yeah. Do you think that it might be offset maybe by, because people used to take the Juggernaut Lord, right?
Yeah.
With Favoured of Khorne.
Yeah.
Do you think players will bother with that guy anymore?
Probably not. You probably wouldn't have him just running around on his own with Favoured of Khorne. But that being said now, I actually think for me it's a decision to even take Angron. I would prefer to take Angron out of the equation and that guy and just take more infantry.
Yeah. for that consistent, you know what's going to happen every game.
Yeah, I just prefer consistent play.
Fair enough.
In my faction, but each to their own.
Yeah, some people like to gamble their entire game on 3/6s.
Some people do. I can't roll them, so there's no point.
So how do you see win rate affecting World Eaters? Because they're very good at the moment, and they've been doing very well at tournaments. How is this going to affect them?
I actually don't think their win rate is going to change a huge amount. If this faction goes first with the scout move, the +2 move, the advance in charge, this faction has the absolute potential to pen your in deployment zone, and that hasn't changed. Sure, the Master Executioner will do a little bit less damage. Sure, you might not have just as much chance for Angron coming back in the late game, but this army's first turn win rate, I think, is going to remain roughly the same. I think it's still going to have the same amount of play into, you know, some of those other factions like Orcs, which operate in a very similar vein.
Yeah.
It's going to have a much better game into Eldar now. I honestly don't think the win rate's going to change significantly.
We're grateful to have Frontline Gaming as our sponsor. They're a truly one-stop shop for all your gaming needs, from terrain in mats to an extensive range of miniatures in the United States. Plus, their community-focused events are known to foster what we call the Warhammer 40k spirit. So if you want to start playing an event and you're truly passionate about the game, then make sure you attend one of the next Frontline Gaming events.
Right, Michael, up next is Space Marines. We're going to take a look at Space Marines first of all, and then we'll take a look at any of those kind of sub-factions like Black Templars or Blood Angels and Space Wolves. So, Michael, Space Marines, any significant changes?
No significant balanced data slate changes, but there are significant points changes.
Yes.
So the most popular units have gone up.
Yeah, if we take a look at the most, I suppose, brutal and effective meta list when it comes to the competitive scene, it's the Vanguard Ultramarine list, where you're seeing lots of Inceptors that can deep strike down, they can redeploy, they can get +1 to hit, ignores cover. We've got the Devastator Centurions in that build as well, Ural Ventress making them deep strike. We've got Scouts, we've got Aggressors. All of those units are significantly up.
Yes, I think the highlight here is Inceptors at +20 for 3.
Yeah, so those lists that were carrying 18, that's massive increases.
I'm not even sure I'd include 3. At 130 points. That's a lot of points.
Inceptors only feel like they work in certain detachments. They work very good in Vanguard and are probably worth 130 points for 3 in Vanguard, but probably aren't worth it in many other places. There might be an argument for the Firestorm detachment, but outside of that, I don't really know. I certainly wasn't taking them at 110 in a Gladius detachment. So I think they've now been very much pigeonholed to certain detachments, but they have every single rule. They've got pistol, they've got assault, they've got twin link, they've got dropping down within 3 inches. They can play the mission for you, they can deal damage, they've got sustained hit on some weapons, so you can see why they've had the increases that they've had. But overall, we're going to see a lot less of them. The Centurions are up, you know, a significant amount as well. Slightly hurts me. The Aggressors are up, again, a very efficient unit that saw a better increase with the Codex because they hit on a better weapon skill. So, yeah, overall, some pretty big changes. We've also said the Whirlwind.
Yeah, so Ironstorms led to the Whirlwind being increased and the Redemptor Dreadnought going up as well. But the Whirlwind going up 35 points. We mentioned Indirect is getting hit, and it is very significant here. However, the silver lining is we've got a lot of points drops on actually, I think, now interesting units.
Yeah.
Assault Intercessors.
I was already taking them.
75 points.
Yeah.
Actually interesting.
Yeah.
Heavy Intercessors, Infernus Intercessors, Sternguard have all gone down as well, your basic Marines.
Outriders significantly down.
Down 15, that's really good.
I think the ATV may have come down as well, I don't know, but that package certainly down.
Generic Marines, the most common units have gone up, and you might consider some of those battle line sort of units. So Black Templars next, and as the resident Black Templar player, any changes?
No rule changes, just point changes.
Okay.
One of the units that was being spammed was the Firstborn Crusader Marines, because you can take every single gun under the sun in 5-man units. It was very, very cheap. It just was multi-melter spam, basically. So it's good to see that's gone up.
Yeah, I actually would argue I would love to see battle line removed from that unit.
Right, okay, yeah.
Just so it was less spammed, because I still think at the 75 odd points, it's still worth spamming.
Yeah, I would agree with that comment, yeah. Helbrecht. So Helbrecht is up 25 points.
Oh, okay.
Now, is somebody that takes Helbrecht, am I going to pay an extra 25 points for him? I probably will because I think he's cool.
Well, you have painted him up as Sigismund, your like favourite Horus Heresy character.
He dies so easily.
Yeah.
He doesn't really hit much harder than some of the other characters that you can already take, like the Emperor's Champion.
Yeah.
He's a great force multiplier. Don't get me wrong. He gives you critical hits of 5s and 6s, but that only really works in one detachment.
Okay, and is that the Righteous Crusaders?
That's the Righteous Crusaders detachment, which nobody takes.
Yeah.
The other way to get sustained hits on that unit is by taking it in the Ironstorm detachment, which a lot of people were doing because then you get all the Ironstorm vehicle buffs with all of your Black Templars vehicles.
Yeah.
Which is actually a problem with the Ironstorm, not the Black Templars themselves.
Yeah.
Because you're just getting a free multi-melter or a 5-point multi-melter per vehicle, which becomes really good when you've got lethal and the rest of it. So
Yeah.
Helbrecht up 25, I think it's a little bit too much personally.
Yeah, I agree.
This next one I do disagree with. Grimaldus up 25 points.
So Grimaldus, why do you think they've given him a points increase? And why do you think they shouldn't have?
On paper, he looks great. He gives you either a 5+ Feel No Pain, or Advance in Charge, or +1 AP on your unit. Here's the issue with it. He does also give you full rerolls to hit for that unit. Again, great. The issue with it is that you can't have any accompanying leaders with that unit to give it any enhancements. Also, his ability is a command phase ability. He'll normally go with a unit that's on foot. Now, if that unit gets hit by indirect, and I know, yeah, that is coming out the game slightly, but even one Night Spinner still massively, or one Basilisk, has the effect it needs to on this unit. So even without the damage being done, it just slows this unit right down. So I just didn't think it was needed, personally, but you win some, you lose some. And overall, my list, I think I've lost a unit of scouts with all the changes in mind. So I wouldn't put Grimaldus in, though.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. Well, sad time, but look, if you're a real Black Templars fan, you'll probably stick him in anyway. With that said, win rate for Black Templars?
I think it's going to stay largely the same.
Okay.
I can't see many changes. I mean, I was running my Black Templars in Gladius. I know a lot of people were running in either Firestorm. That build is probably going to change because there'll be less units, but maybe it's one less unit that you've spammed.
Yeah.
Is that really going to change things? I don't know. I don't think the Ironstorm detachment is going to change significantly in terms of that win rate. I still think that's going to be very, very good. So on the whole, I don't see massive, changes actually happening with its win rate.
Blood Angels, then, your Lost Love. What do you think of the changes to these? What are they?
So there is a rules change to their detachment.
Okay, the Sons of Sanguinius.
Yep, you now get +2 strength on the charge, not just +1.
Okay, how does this actually impact the melee profiles of the units?
Not enough, I don't think, personally,
Okay, right.
to really help the army where it's weakest. So if we look at this as a baseline, your power weapons that are normally strength 5, they're now going up to strength 7.
Okay, and they were already wounding on 3s.
Yeah, is there a huge difference between strength 6 and strength 7? Not really. Yes, it can become slightly more effective when you add in, for example, a captain with a jump pack. With your Vanguard vets, you could start getting them into the strength 8 territory.
Okay.
Most of the things you're going to want to go into, you've already got the ability to have Lance if you needed the +1 to wound. I just don't think it's enough. If it was +2 strength and +2 attacks, I think then actually you might start looking at this detachment, because I think otherwise Gladius is just better.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair, and that is a common argument with all of the supplements, really.
Yeah.
Power Fist at strength 10 sounds interesting.
Yeah.
At the same time, you can just lance. It's a tough one. Do you think there's anything Games Workshop probably should have done or could have done that is maybe a missed opportunity?
Mephiston, we don't really see him. It'd be nice to see him go down in points a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because he can only join those Assault Intercessors. They've come down as well. Maybe as a package that looks a little bit more appealing with the combined two together. Sangard, with their ability to only take 5 or 10, 5 aren't really effective. 10, are just very, very expensive. So maybe they could have come down slightly because they do die very, very easily still to devastating wounds specifically. So I think Lamarte's, the Death Company, are probably fine as is. But yeah, I think overall that detachment probably just needed a little bit more help to make it more viable than the tactical flexibility that Gladius gives you.
Would you say then that Blood Angels as a faction, their win rate basically depends on the Space Marine win rate?
Yeah.
Because they just probably still won't use Sons of Sanguinius.
Okay, Michael, up next is Dark Angels. Now, weird space for this because the codexes are viable only in the box set.
Yes, so the actual codex isn't officially out. And what you'll notice here with the index is some of the unit compositions don't make sense compared to the new codex if you have it.
Yeah.
Prime example, Raven Wing Command Squad is a 3 to 6 in this Unitorum field manual. It's just a 3-man squad in the codex. So I don't know, I can't really give you guidance as to whether to run these points or the codex points. The Raven Wing Command at 110 points is down 75 from the codex. And their role has completely changed now because their lead is in the book.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to run with these points because I think it's cool. But that does seem like quite a lot.
I would probably be looking at this as you use the unit sizes from the codex.
Right.
Because that is normally dictated from your data sheet.
Okay.
Not necessarily what's at the back, but where it's got like how you build out your force is actually on the data sheet, which we always use. But because this is coming out after that codex drop, I would be using these points.
Okay, fair enough. And if you are, well, I've got news for you. The Knights here are 235 points. So you don't have to worry about the 290 tax. And we do have a lot of drops across the rest of them. The Lion going down 30 from the codex from his original cost. So all round, Dark Angels...
If what we've said is true...
If these are the points for them, then... Yeah, I think we've got some good stuff going. The detachment, the supplement's not amazing, so I wouldn't expect the win rate to be tied to the supplement. Yeah. I would expect it to depend more on how the Codex units are impacted by the Codex Space Marines detachments.
Yeah, I would agree with that comment, yeah. Right, Michael, Deathwatch, any changes?
Real quick one here, no balance data slate changes.
Okay.
The Spectrus kill team had a wording change, so it doesn't have to come on the turn after you leave the board. But that is literally it.
Okay, so no changes for Deathwatch then?
No changes.
Okay.
Yeah. What you might see is maybe more Indomitors kill teams instead of taking just aggressors because of the points hike on aggressors and Inceptors. So it might be a way to access those profiles for a bit cheaper. But other than that, I can't see any real changes for Deathwatch, sadly.
Okay, Michael, to wrap this up, the Wolves, the Space Wolves, any army rule changes?
Yes. Thankfully, and for the better, although whether it's good enough we'll see. The detachment now, their sagas are completed at the end of a turn rather than the battle round.
Great.
So if you kill an enemy character with your character in your first turn, you don't have to wait until the end of battle round 1 to get your army rule.
Well, this also means as well, you've got double the opportunity to unlock your sagas. Not only that, but you're also potentially unlocking them at twice the speed. So you could easily, for example, kill an enemy vehicle or monster in your turn, and then in your opponent's turn, your opponent makes a charge and you kill a character. You could precision them out. So again, that's much, much faster. You've got the options to pick what you want, which is much better, I think, for the faction, just to speed up its progress in the game.
It's better for the faction, but Steve, it's not going to trump the Stormlance detachment for Wolves. So unfortunately, if you were hoping that you'd be brought back into taking the Saga detachment, not likely. It's a shame. Yeah, we do have some other changes, some big ones.
Okay.
So a lot of stuff's just been brought in line with hitting on 2s on lieutenants and captains because they hit on 3s in their index cards. Wolfguard pack leaders have had their attacks reduced to fit a normal Terminator.
Okay.
Those were like the Sergeant Terminators. Right. Wolfen Hammer.
Okay. The unit that was done dirty in 10th edition.
Strength 6.
Okay.
Damage 2.
What? Damage 2?
Their damage has doubled.
Nice.
But their points haven't changed.
Wow. They were cheap.
They were cheap. They're 80 points at current.
Okay.
So I'm just saying.
3 units of 5 Wolfen are now viable.
Yeah.
That is a nice little trading unit, especially if you're in the advance in charge detachment. Okay, I'm interested.
I want to see what happens. If you're playing Wolves, comment below. Let us know how it goes. That's really interesting, that one. In terms of win rate for Wolves, probably up a little.
Up a little bit, yeah.
Because the Stormlance and the stuff that I think most Wolves were playing hasn't really been touched.
Yeah.
So up a little, because the rest is... You're not going to get as hurt with your Wolves by the indirect as much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think this is starting to look a little bit more viable then. Yeah. 80-point Wolfen, that's not bad. Guys, we really, really hope you've enjoyed our overview and, you know, you've got a bit of an idea now of how the meta might change or shift in what are going to be the biggest winners and some of those losers. But do make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications when we release more and more content. We've got that Drukhari detachment coming up. We're going to have lots of members content as well, focusing a little bit more in depth on how the meta is going to shake out. And of course, we've got loads of Dark Angels content to be coming out at this time as well with the recent release of their codex and some of those cool new units. So once again, thank you Games Workshop for sending us this preview access. And if you want to take your game to the next level, then consider joining the Academy because enrollment is open for you, which is going to be coming very, very soon. And all the links for that are going to be in the link below. So if you want to become confident at the table and understand the fundamentals of the game right the way through to some advanced tactics, whether it's army list writing to how to be an amazing opponent, then consider joining the Academy. And we'll see you on the next video.